I'm Rosella Garcia, the Director of Alumni Relations, and I'm very excited to be working with our team here to continue to bring opportunities for the TC alumni to engage with TC, learn about all of the wonderful ongoing initiatives that we have here, and to build a robust alumni network, allowing you all to get to know one another and to engage, and also find out what's happening here on campus. And hopefully you've noticed that we are providing you with added ways of connecting, opportunities to learn about additional programs, and providing you with the opportunity to network both virtually and face-to-face. And you can find a complete list of all of our upcoming events and programs on our website, which is tc.edu/alumni, or in our monthly e-newsletter. I also wanted to quickly announce that Academic Festival has been set for April 12th, 2012. We are going to be unveiling our theme and some of our speakers in the coming months, so stay tuned for that. And you can find updates about Academic Festival and all of our other events by also connecting to us through LinkedIn, Facebook, and following us on Twitter. I wanted to quickly take a moment to thank all of our TC Fund members and the alumni. You may have noticed that a few alumni have ribbons on their name tags, and this designates the giving societies that they belong to. And these alumni participate in one of our 3 member societies. The Grace Dodge Society is those alumni or friends who have remembered us in their requests. And we have the John Dewey Circle, which is alumni who give at a level of $1,000 or more annually. And our Maxine Green Society is our newest society and was designed to engage alumni at any stage of their career by just honoring and recognizing consistent giving at any level to TC. So even if you made a very small donation for 5 years consecutively, you could be a part of the Maxine Green Society. And I encourage you all to think about supporting the TC Fund, because it does allow us the flexibility to really provide all sorts of funds and opportunities for TC. Not only do we budget with these resources, but it also gives us the opportunity to sort of think big and realize our dreams as an institution. Another way of giving back to TC is by getting involved with the Alumni Council, which is a volunteer board of 35 members that play an influential role in the direction and programming of our alumni activities. And actually the reason we're sitting here today is because of one of the ideas of one of our Alumni Council members, Mary Jo Meade-Weinig. And she is actually, has a passion for increasing literacy herself, and through that endeavor has had an opportunity to connect with Marjorie. So Mary Jo, do you want to just share a little bit about how you came to know Marjorie and why literacy is so important to you?
Sure. As Rosella said, I am a member of the Alumni Council, and as such, I felt it was important to find out what was being done here at TC. So some years ago, I started to investigate other departments. I have a degree in speech language pathology from 2000, and I knew about my department, but nothing about the rest of TC. So I thought it was time to learn about it so that I could become informed and also reconnect to some of the other students. Long story short, I met Marjorie as I was starting a program called Read a Recipe for Literacy. And she was tremendously helpful in terms of my developing my program. And at that time I thought, well, had I known about this when I was a speech pathologist or studying for speech pathology, it would have been a lot easier, and I think I would have become a better speech pathologist more quickly, because I had all these other resources that I could tap. And now that I've met her and I've pursued different avenues in the school trying to learn more about it, I thought it would be a wise thing for me to do, to share that experience with you, so that if there's anyone who is in a similar situation where they're looking to do something or learn more about some other field, you don't know what you've got here. It's tremendous. And I was very, very lucky, because Marjorie was more than generous with her time. And I wanted to thank her for doing that. And I thought, well, the way to do that is to spread the word, and her word is worth spreading. So there you go. Sure.
Thank you, Mary Jo.
Sure.
Thank you for encouraging us to provide the opportunity to explore this important topic and to share it with our alumni community. And we at TC are so proud that our faculty members do care about TC, and they do care about our alumni, whether it's engaging on a one-on-one basis or by participating in events like this. So it's now my pleasure to give you a little bit more information about our special speaker tonight, Marjorie Siegel, who is a professor and the chair of the Department of Curriculum and Teaching here at Teachers College. And she's actually, she teaches in the Literacy Specialist MA program as well as the EDD program. And before joining the TC faculty here in 1993, she taught at the University of Utah and the University of Rochester. She began her career as a Title I reading teacher in Madison, Wisconsin after studying elementary education at the University of Wisconsin. Spurred by exciting new research on the reading process that began to appear in the mid-1970s, Marjorie pursued doctoral studies in reading education at Indiana University, Bloomington, where her dissertation examined the meanings children generated when they drew their interpretation of texts they had read. This work took her from language to semiotics, which is the study of signs and symbols of all kinds, and set the stage for her career-long interest in expanding the conventional boundaries of the literacy curriculum so school literacy could become more meaningful to more children. Her current research explores the social meanings of young children's multimodal literacies in school settings. Marjorie's work has appeared in numerous journals, research handbooks, and edited volumes, and she has co-authored 2 books. Marjorie, please join us. Join me here. Welcome, Marjorie.
Well, this is a very formal setting for what I hope will be much more of a conversation. And I'm really delighted to be here today, and I thank Mary Jo for suggesting that I do this. This is my first alumni event. And one of the things I always say at the department orientation, and I said it this year and I say it all the time, is the best thing about Teachers College are the students. And that is true every year when I meet our new class of students coming into the Department of Curriculum and Teaching. I am in awe of their experience, their commitment, their professionalism. And it's a pleasure today to not only meet all of you, but among you are some graduates who actually were in a class of mine, and some graduates from CNT. So I know that I've had a chance to chat with a few of you, and that it's just one of our best resources at TC are all of you. And so I say that early and often to the students at the beginning and at the end. So thank you again for having me here. Mary Jo mentioned that she has her degree in speech and language pathology, and that in her department she wasn't really aware of other departments, and part of inviting me was to tell you a little bit about the Department of Curriculum and Teaching. And so it's a pleasure to do that. And I'm taking on the position of department chair for the second time. I was department chair from 2004 to 2007, so I now know what I got myself into. And those of you who have had administrative positions, as I'm sure many of you have, know that there's a lot of detail work, and I've spent the first 2 weeks of the semester solving problems and answering emails. But the opportunity, especially the second time around, is to help the department achieve what I, as a member of the department, and other faculty want to achieve in order to make the department continuing to be responding to the most important problems, to be cutting edge in the work that we do, and to prepare the professionals like yourselves who go and make such a big impact on people's lives every day. So a little background about the Department of Curriculum and Teaching. Did you know that we were the first department, formed in 1938, the first department in the country to bring together the study of curriculum and teaching? Prior to that, people who taught at the elementary schools were in a separate department from people who taught in the high schools. And instead, the vision of the people at Teachers College at that time was to say that there were common questions, common problems, common issues, and that there would be a benefit to put this all under the umbrella. And so from the very beginning, this department prepared early childhood teachers, elementary teachers, secondary teachers, leaders like principals and administrators, teacher educators, that is teachers of teachers, and a few other categories. The one category that they prepared that we no longer fully take on is adult education which I think means the education of people maybe in different pathways through schooling. So, because teachers, of course, are adults, and that's adult education. But I think they had, like I said, a different meaning for that. So what I tell the students at orientation is that we're still doing all of that work in curriculum and teaching. But what's changed and what's exciting about what we're doing is that we're preparing teachers for the realities of the children and the students who are in the classroom. And so while we started in the reorganization that took place in 1995, we were joined by some faculty from special ed, the former special ed department. We have really integrated that together. So now when our elementary school teachers are prepared, they are prepared for inclusive classrooms and for teaching all children. Some children might need some special help, but the idea is that the classroom teacher, and sometimes it's two classroom teachers together in a CTT, cooperative teaching situation, to provide the best opportunities for learning for all of the children. So our department has really worked very hard to create programs that will be inclusive in the broadest meaning of that. So for elementary, and that's also occurred at the early childhood level. So we prepare early childhood educators, some of whom would work in pre-K settings, daycare centers, and so on, but also early childhood means kindergarten, first and second grade. And my colleagues Celia Ganeshi and Susan Recchia have also created an integrated early childhood program. So that's one theme that really reflects changes in the way people think about schooling and the way they think about children. And so that's a big theme. I think another development is the development of the Literacy Specialist Program. I'll sort of toot my own, not my own horn, but my own program's horn, and say that over the years, some of you know Lucy Calkins' work, and in the early years of her career at Teachers College, Lucy was in the English education program. But in about 1995, she moved over to curriculum and teaching because she really prepares elementary teachers and works in elementary schools. And maybe about in 2005 or so, the state required that we reorganize and recertify our programs, and that gave us an opening to create a literacy specialist program. So now, Lucy and I co-coordinate a program, and we have some graduates here today, that prepare people to be leaders in literacy settings. Sometimes they're leading through being an elementary school teacher who is working on grade level work as well as across grade levels. And sometimes it's a position in which they're stepping out of their classroom setting and doing leadership in across the whole school. Sometimes people are moving into staff development. So the Literacy Specialist Program has really taken off and is one of the programs that is growing the fastest in the department. In addition, we have programs in gifted education. We have programs in for elementary and secondary teachers who are already experienced teachers to come back and get a professional certification so that they can study more deeply in their fields of elementary and secondary. We have a new program called Teacher Residency at Teachers College, TR at TC, and that program is an attempt to put teachers right in the classrooms, but also provide them with the good preparation that we provide here at Teachers College. Rather than giving them a couple summers of coursework, they are both in the classroom and in preparation. And my colleague and now the Associate Dean of Teacher Education, Lynn Goodwin, is the head of that program, and that's been an exciting. And those students are getting certified and also in be prepared to teach students with disabilities. And so this theme of inclusion and a broad understanding of learning has been taken over the department. Now, in addition to that, we have Master of Education program, an EDM program, and that's an interesting program that really attracts international students. It doesn't, it's not part of any certification, but it allows teachers who are experienced to really dive in, develop a project that they want to carry out, and take courses of their choosing. So instead of following a curriculum that's tied to certification, they get to really develop their own pathway, which is great. And finally, we have a doctoral program, EDD program. Last night I was teaching in the first year doctoral core course on research and curriculum theory and history, and we have 20 brand new doctoral students who are fantastic, they're from all over the country and the world, and they come to take on questions of research. They don't all go on to be professors and faculty, but they do all go on to use what they learn about research in their teaching, in their educational leadership, and in the work that they do. So many of them want to be teacher educators, and they go on to do a variety of things, but they're also very, very exciting, very accomplished folks. So we have this broad base, and we're really trying to address social injustices and themes of attending to children who have not received the kind of education that children of privilege have, and that really harkens back to TC's origins and the theme. So really, in many ways, the past is part of the present, and in our department, that's it's vibrant. And I think right now we're working on keeping up with the changes, and as you all know, the changes are not so friendly out there in the climate for teachers, and K-12 teachers in particular are on the firing line. Education is under siege, and yet we are still here, and we think Teachers College still has a unique place and a unique contribution. So we're thinking about how to bring our scholarship in relationship to these current problems and to figure out how we're going to position ourselves when you have for-profit schools that are now cropping up in teacher education, and there's going to be there are currently many, many ways to become a teacher other than the traditional route through universities. So we have some challenges to face, like all of education, and come back next year and I'll tell you where we are with that. Right now we're thinking about that. We need to be more nimble in thinking about that. So let me switch to the topic. Rosella asked for a title, and we ended up with More Than Words, which might seem like an odd title for literacy. What do you do? What do you mean more than words? And I just wanted to highlight a couple of themes in the field right now of literacy education. And I think for me and my interests in my research and my teaching, More Than Words really does encapsulate some of what I think people are thinking about. One interpretation of More Than Words is to connect the word to the world. Again, that seems like a very obvious thing, but in school we don't always do the obvious thing. So it's important that people are thinking about how language and literacy are connected to acting and being in the world. And if you've heard that phrase, reading the word and the world, you're probably remembering the important Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, who wrote about literacy for freedom, literacy for critical consciousness, and he coined the phrase reading the word and the world, and that you cannot read the word without also reading the world, nor can you read the world without reading the word. They are intertwined. And his metaphor, in a sense, of reading the world has become a beacon for people who are concerned with the role of language and literacy in both social justice and social injustice. And he particularly was fighting for liberation in people in Brazil and using literacy as a tool for liberation. And he talked about rewriting the world. And I think when Mary Jo first came to me with her program on Read a Recipe and we started to have conversations, when I thought about what I would talk about today, I would suggest that Mary Jo's work is a wonderful example of this notion of reading the word and the world. And I'll tell you a little story that she shared with me, and then she might want to make a few more comments. And so Mary Jo said something new was happening on the North Fork of Long Island. And anyone here from Long Island? No. But you read the papers and you know that the population has changed. There's farms out there, and so migrant workers from families from Guatemala and Mexico were moving to the North Fork to pick potatoes and to harvest the crops. and bringing their children and their families. And so they were doing this important work for us, but yet they felt afraid to come to the library. And so they were in the world, but their words didn't matter, and they didn't have opportunities to grow their language and develop their language in some of the ways. And Mary Jo saw that, and particularly felt that there were some huge gulfs between these folks who were doing this important work, but who were not regarded as members of the community. And so I think some of you are, I'm sure, are aware of some terrible hate crimes that have occurred in those communities. And although Mary Jo didn't talk about that, her impulse was, can I bring people together? And I loved her metaphor of the communal table and the idea of bringing people together at a communal table. And what can people do together? Well, eat together, share a meal, think together about the earth, think about how to sustain not only the earth and the world, but human relationships, social relationships, and the distinctive role of language in that. So from that, she said, okay, I can't get to the adults so easily because for lots of reasons, but I want to get to the children. So she started this idea of Read a Recipe, which was founded on the ideas of building community, appreciation, respect for the environment, sustainability, and of course language. Mary Jo's a language and speech and language person, and so she wanted to help people develop language and to communicate across this gulf, this boundary. So the idea was people would come together in a library setting, but they would talk to people who were in the community, and they might even have a meal together and begin to prepare meals together. So why don't you fill in a little bit more about some of the details?
When we first started the program, I was a facilitator. I asked people in the community to come in and speak to the children about the community, about what they did in the community, and why reading and writing or communication was so important to them. I had a potato farmer come in, I had a principal come in, I had a woman actually who started a potato chip company, North Fork Potato Chip Company on Long Island. I had a number of different speakers come. I had an oyster harvester producer come in, and it was wonderful. All of these people, I had never met any of these people. I called them up, I said, look, this is the little program I've got. Could you come in and tell the children what you do in this community so they'd feel that they can understand where they're coming from? And also it was very much related to food in many cases. All of these speakers came in, they were tremendous. They were very interested in making a contribution to their community, to sharing their experiences with the children, which they did. They spoke for perhaps 10, 15 minutes on different occasions. One speaker per week would come in and sum up their little talk with why reading, writing, or communication in general was so important to them and to their life's work. And it was wonderful. The children learned about their environment, learned how important communication was, and the parents who came in to pick the children up after the program learned about what was happening in their community, and it all worked together very nicely. So that's one other aspect of the program I think that's very telling about the communities we're working in.
I think that's really nice about it is that Mary Jo ended up hiring some of our literacy specialist students, not the ones here today, but some other students to help work on a little guide for the volunteers. So, if you have a vision of something, you want people to, have some fidelity to that vision. And so, thinking curricularly, the idea was to make the language and literacy component of the program to be as meaningful as possible and to be as purposeful as possible, and not to do exercises, but to, here you have this opportunity, there are, reading a recipe, it's a text that really has meaning, and you do something with it, and you can see the effects of it, and it seems that in out-of-school settings, particularly like that, if you turn language and literacy into a school exercise, you've really missed the boat. You've really missed the opportunity to catch the fire and to really help people see that words work in the world. And in Mary Jo's case, as an educator, broadly considered, she's working on remaking the world, rewriting the world, and to see the possibilities for communication and change. So that is one example, and I think it's a great one. And you may be involved in all kinds of things where you're connecting with your students, the word and the world. But I see that as really basic. We talk a lot about the basics in literacy, and for me the basic is that interrelationship of language, literacy, and the world that it's working in and working on. And to get kids to be, some of our work is in our program is to help students become as flexible with the range of purposes, genres that are required, but also to understand how texts work and how texts are often designed to work on people, to get you to do certain things, believe certain things, and to be conscious of that. So Paulo Freire was very much focused on people understanding how the world worked and how texts work as sort of a representation, a cultural artifact that was actively shaping social relationships and the like. So some of you, I'm sure, know his work, and this area has started to be known as an area called critical literacy. So when we talk about literacy, we're now talking about more than one kind of literacy. And critical literacy is this notion of reading as not just a reading decoding, and not even just comprehension in the ways that we think about understanding what we read as basic, but reading beneath, beyond the text to the world, to see the connections and to see what meanings are really there. So I'll mention one other theme, and it really reflects more of the research that I've done and what I'm focused on, and that's the idea of more than words means more kinds of ways of representing and symbolizing meanings than just language. So in the introduction, Rosella mentioned my dissertation research done many, many, many years ago, where I was interested in having children draw their interpretation, not answer questions, but to draw their interpretation, which was a very weirdo idea. But it has a very strong theoretical basis in this broader sense of semiotics, signs and symbols that are everywhere, from the smoke in a fire to the traffic light to things that are more governed by habits like language and seem more rule-bound. So that was 25 years ago, and it seemed like a weird idea now, but you know what? It doesn't seem so weird now, because if you look around, texts have really changed. And what was once a specialty where you went to school to be a designer, and you needed a lot of fancy equipment to create something that you and I can go to our computer, open a Word document, we can insert pictures, we can have word art, and we can design a flyer or any kind of text that combines words, images, music, sometimes animation. Any website is what we now call a multimodal text. And so this notion that there's different modes or different symbolic resources, and that we now need to help children become facile and sophisticated and wide-awake users of all resources, not just language, but also images, text, drama, whatever kinds of resources you're thinking about that can make and represent meaning are now available. And so the internet, the easy digital practice, the click and drag and drop, that's really what has made it easy. And so young children, very young children, now create those texts digitally. But you know what? They could always create it with crayons and their bodies as they danced and sang and acted out a text or drew, and they start to write a story, and the next thing you know, they're creating a dramatic scene. When I was a doctoral student, I studied with Jerry Harstein, Carolyn Burke, and Virginia Woodward, who are well known for their book called Language Stories and Literacy Lessons. And they did work on early literacy, what we now call emergent literacy, and they asked 3, 4, 5, and 6-year-olds to do things like write a story, draw a picture, and write a letter to someone. And they were interested not in conventional literacy, like could they form the alphabet, Could they sound out words? Turns out older kids, of course, could do that. But even the youngest ones understood that a squiggle could represent their name, even if it wasn't written conventionally. And they also, when they especially had the children write a story, they would start to draw, and there's a classic example from their book of a little girl going, she started writing some numbers, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, then the next thing you know, she's making noises and talking about, you know, a rocket taking off, and it went from the text to a whole dramatic engagement. And so the idea that children's literacy learning was already multimodal. It was not just about words. It was about connecting words to other kinds of communication. Now that study was done in the mid-70s and, you know, won an award, and that's old news. But what's news and what the rub is and the problem and the work that I've been looking at is to see that schools still treat literacy as if it's words only. And the problem is that there are lots of children who come in, particularly children for whom English is not their first language, who have lots of resources and knowledge and understanding, but they can't necessarily represent it in a form that we value and understand. And I saw this very clearly. I did a year-long study of a kindergarten at a school I could walk to from Teachers College. Very high free lunch, which is a proxy for low socioeconomic status, and children are having the free lunch. And this kindergarten class was a wonderful place, a wonderful teacher, graduate of Teachers College, connected in many ways to the college. And the children were invited not only to participate in writing workshop, but writing workshop went up to the computer lab. And oddly enough, at this school, it was the younger grades, the primary grades, where the teachers were very excited about the digital possibilities for literacy and made sure their kids went up to the computer lab twice a week, not just once a week. And it was an extension of the writing workshop. So I followed the kids across the writing workshop in the classroom with pencils and paper, and going up to the computer lab where they had a mouse and a screen. So the tools were quite different. And sometimes the kind of writing they were asked to do was different. And what I want to say is the image that I want to leave you with, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers, is Jewel. I call her Jewel. That wasn't her name, but that's what I call her because she was a jewel. And she was a jewel that was not always discovered and didn't always shine in the classroom. And that's because she was from Bangladesh, and she was learning English. She had been born here, but her family was from Bangladesh. And they went back often as they could. And she had spent her pre-K year, according to her teachers, silent. So she was in a period of listening, taking it in, but she wasn't producing language. In kindergarten, she was starting to talk. And at the end of the year, her kindergarten teacher said that her oral language was her prime achievement. But what she didn't see was that although Jewel was not as strong as some other students in writing, and in kindergarten now, as you know, they're expected to write stories of 2 or 3 or 4 lines and several pages using conventional spelling and so on. So she was able to do some representation, but not as much as there were lots of children who wrote whole books. But when we went to the computer lab, she was a different kid. And I've got her on videotape, and you can see in the writing workshop, she looks like this. Her head is bent over, she's closing herself off from others, and she's just kind of drawing, a lot of drawing, but she never quite gets to the words or the letters unless the teacher came in to help her. In the computer lab, she's different. Gets in there, pulls the screen down, gets the mouse, clicks, shows how to create a text. Sometimes the teacher was having them do more visual text, like create a map of your bedroom, or we've just been to the botanical gardens up at the Bronx Zoo, so let's do a picture and then write about it. Or they did frog life cycle. I don't know, do frogs have a lifestyle? Kind of murky there, but in any case, she, good, somebody got my joke. Bad joke, well, murky lifestyle for a frog, right? So anyway, she is up there and she's more in control. and she's able to create a text and to, I don't mean that she turned into a great writer, but in the computer lab, she was able to create text that had meaning, that drew on more ways of meaning than just language, more than words. That she was able, and more than words was valued. And in fact, you can communicate quite a bit through more than words. And yet, so that's, to me, that's one of the challenges, is how we think about a literacy curriculum in school that begins to stretch beyond the conventional meanings of literacy, the conventional forms of text, because we do want children to be prepared for this 21st century. And words are never, we're never going to diminish their importance in literacy and language. But it's about stretching the meaning of that. So with that, I thank you, and I'm interested in hearing what you're doing in schools and in and out of the world. In and out of the world, in and out of schools.
Yeah, that's good, the way the language gets expressed and how you elicit that, and exploring the curiosity of kids. Like, she may be good at math or research or learning Spanish or something, and me as a teacher or a parent, it's my business and incumbent to bring it out.
Yeah, I think that's something that teachers are always aiming for.
Not only a responsibility, but incumbent.
In what?
Incumbent.
Yeah, incumbent. I think that's something that we try to
Exactly.
to emphasize, but I think that there's always tensions between the climate now and the fact that the test scores are so important. They are it. And so it's easy for me to stand here and say these things, and as a researcher to go in, but as a teacher who is responsible for having the children succeed, and we do want children to succeed on tests because they're a pathway, and they can block opportunities as well as open them. But I do think that the pathway in to being successful even in conventional literacy for some children are through these other pathways, whether it's through drama or through drawing, and trying to make room for that is, I think, a big challenge. Yeah.
Thank you for, I like how you say it's more than words. One of the challenges that I'm facing as a parent and also an educator is it seems like there's a paradigm shift in terms of how we think about literacy and how we teach it. And so, as an example, I have a 6-year-old, and some of the tools I learned, how to learn vocabulary, how to read, it was very phonics based. I realized that it's completely different from how my son is expected to learn. And so my challenge is, how do I learn the newer way, or just the new thinking about the new approach and how we should really think about literacy, because I'm still operating based on the habit of how I've learned.
And that's a strength too. What you bring as a parent in your own history is not, it's not a negative in any way. Children can, draw on and benefit from lots of different approaches. But I think what you're asking is, you're asking very clearly how to support your child in his classroom. And I guess the starting point for me is always dialogue with the teacher. That's one way. You might be looking for some other kinds of ways. I guess I would start with the school. Schools often provide opportunities for families to come together to talk about, what is this big book reading? Or what is this, where is phonics in this curriculum? It might be there, but not in the form that it took when you were a student. We've got lots of teachers here, and I wonder if others, and you're an educator yourself, what would you like to see?
So one of the questions, one of the things I learned through my conversation with the teacher was now they're focusing they're focused on the strategies. And so where the child is working independently now, like what is the strategy he or she is using versus, I focus on, did you pronounce it right? Did you use, it was just very, very cut and dry, whereas there's this idea that there's 20 different strategies
Right.
you need to use. And
Right.
one of the things I'm like, wow, maybe these are skills in which I might have internalized. I don't really know how to explain.
Yeah.
But now I'm trying to figure out, how do I understand what the strategy is, and then how do you
Yeah.
translate that? And so the question was, how do I understand this paradigm shift?
Yeah.
And then how do I understand how to explain these various strategies for kids?
Yeah.
This is something that's innate with me.
That's a really interesting question that you're talking about strategies, because strategies has become the language of the teaching of reading. And when Mary Jo, or when Rosella introduced me and said that I was excited about this new research in the mid-70s, that was the research. It's taken that long for it to get to the classroom, that reading was not simply a matter of isolated skills, but instead it was human thinking that involved making predictions and sampling the information and then confirming and always asking yourself, does this make sense? Does this make sense? This idea of metacognitive awareness, that you're aware of your own thinking, and that readers who are successful in making meaning have always done this. And so that's what some of this research, which came out of the cognitive psychology a new tradition that started in the mid-70s. And so you're right, you do it, but you don't have a name for it. And what school is doing is naming it and making it explicit, so that we're making private thinking public and explicit. And so that is a different way of talking. So instead of talking about sounding out, although sounding out is still a valuable strategy, it's not the only one. And how do you get that? You're right, you already use a lot of these. And what you might not know is the names that the school is using. So, I mean, I think one of the things to ask the teacher is, what are some of the strategies that she's emphasizing? You can definitely assume that constantly monitoring your thinking for meaning making, does this make sense, does this make sense, is a really important strategy. Predicting, making the connection between what you already know and what's in the text, making connections like that, just as I said, between the word and the world. Your experience is essential to your understanding of a text. And we used to treat text as if it was separate, and you just brought what you called mechanical skills, but sounding out, syntax, and using phonics and so on to pronounce the words. Pronouncing the words is not reading, and so I'm not even sure it's necessary, because you can read silently, without pronouncing anything. So I think it's an interesting question, and I would encourage you to ask the teachers and the school to name some of them for you. But I would encourage you to trust yourself too, and to trust that you as an educator and as someone who is a facile reader and someone who understands and has a variety of texts and ways of handling them, that you can start sharing your strategies. You have valuable strategies to share, and it's about thinking about them and making them verbal. Got a lot of people to comment, so.
I, as a teacher and as a parent, I struggle with metrics, because as an educator, you always want to teach the word in the world, because you want to get them ready for life and not just school. But I almost wish that there was a new department in C&T that would introduce teachers that could actually start designing these tests that we ask our kids to take, because I don't know, I'm sure they're doing a great job and they're working very hard, but they're not speaking to the word in the world. They're just, they're pointing the tests. And so I feel like this could be a whole different department where teachers are now designing ways to grasp those things that are not so tangible, and not just decoding and not just comprehension. Absolutely, that too.
I think
I don't know, it's more of a wish than a question.
Well, but if we're talking about, one of the things that an institution like Teachers College does is think about the framing of problems. Research is as much about how you frame a problem as applying some techniques for, running around and collecting data. You have to think about the problem and what are different ways to think about the problem and imagining a new possibility. You mentioned Maxine Green, who is, of course, the heart and soul for many of us of Teachers College, and she talks about a social imagination of how things might be otherwise. And our department really resonates with that idea that we want things to be different. So what is the best kind of test you could make? You know, that seems like, oh, we wouldn't really want to feed into that. But actually, the best kind of test would be success in the world, right? That's the broadest, most amorphous kind of response. But you could think curricularly. We are a Department of Curriculum and Teaching, and assessment is a really important part of curriculum and teaching, to think about what kinds of assessments.
Hi. I'm in education, but I'm not in schools. And the beauty of that is that I see Jewel all the time. But in this culture that we're living in now, where everything has to be data-driven, I instill a responsibility of mine to be able to quantify Jewel's experience. And I was wondering, how do we work with that? What measurements exist? How do we capture that experience to communicate to funders that though she may not have written this book, we have given her the skills, or she has the experience within her to eventually be able to do that. Because we're all about process and not product, but funders don't want to hear that.
You're very right about that, and I think that we're somehow back on the same topic, and I'm thinking on my feet here, because I think that is really, I don't have a ready response to that, but I think that one of the things that I do think is important, and that your question sparks, is the idea that if we're thinking about literacy differently, then we have to develop new language around it. And so the gentleman who raised the question about strategies, you're really talking about a new language for talking about reading and literacy. And if I'm suggesting that it's more than words, and many people use the phrase multi-literacies or new literacies, digital literacies, people are working on identifying and putting language. It's another step then to attach a kind of number to that. And that's, you know, we have a Thorndike Hall here. And in my class last night, we were talking about the legacy of Edward Thorndike, who said anything that matters can be measured. And so, you know, I think that's usually not how I think about it. But what I will say is might be a kind of meeting point there to address the needs that are very much in the real world. And of course, we have to deal with that, is the notion of mixed methods. So in research, people are talking about mixed methods. That is bringing together qualitative and quantitative approaches to doing research, because you need multiple perspectives. And I would submit that probably the closest response I could give is one that says, okay, we have to come up with new metrics for the new literacies, but we can't, I would never want to separate them and rely only on the numbers. I would, at the minimum, want to see what people are calling a mixed methods approach, in which you have to have the context, you have to have the portraits, you have to have, because I don't know how you collapse a drawing, although I'm sure people could do that. They could codify them in certain ways as evidence of growth. People have tended not to do that in those areas that are not language. So I guess, you know, you have identified, along with Nasreem, some new areas that are in need of development, dissertation research for our students. Thank you for raising that, because I think that is very much a big issue. I wish I had a better response. I don't want to go on too long, but I'm happy to keep, you know, conversation going. Were there more things? Yeah.
I have actually a couple of questions, but I'll start with one, which is probably a very basic one. And that is to think about the difference between learning to read and literacy. Because the examples that you bring up mostly have had to do with younger children in this particular lecture. And I'm sure you have many other examples, many other populations as well. But when I think about literacy, I often think more about adults who, or perhaps older children who may have missed the boat on the reading at the earlier stage, and then fallen by the wayside in some way or another. But are you sort of equating, or what is the relationship you're seeing between literacy and reading in that young population of 4 or 5 year olds?
It's a great question that again gets at the heart of the current issues in the field, and the field has had a paradigm shift. I wasn't going to use that, but since one of our colleagues has, I'll use that. So that the field has shifted from, not the whole field, but the field as I'm representing it and the way I think about it, and you would get, of course, a different answer from somebody else. But I think that the field has shifted from talking about reading to talking about literacy. It's not that we don't talk about reading, but I think that a couple of things have led to an enlargement of the concept, so that what you're talking about is really what Paulo Freire was initially concerned with, which was adults who could not read, who were, farm workers in Brazil, and they had totally not had opportunities to engage in any kind of schooling, and these were worker circles that were outside, in their place of work, and he developed, approaches that, one can read about. So that notion of adult literacy still exists, and obviously the problem is there. But we talked about that for adults, and then you're right, we had this school language of teaching reading, and then later we decided we would teach writing too. The reason it shifted to a broader meaning that that encompasses even young children learning to read and write in school is that the research on young children and the research on literacy began to see the connections between reading and writing, the connections that I'm talking about between reading, writing, and other forms of communication. And so the word that was needed, even though the Oxford English Dictionary definition of literacy is a lettered person, you'll find that with the connection first to writing, to oral, listening and speaking, and now to digital with visual and other modes of communication, that you see this enlargement of meaning, and reading and writing didn't cut it. And so they took literacy, and now we have phrases like multi-literacies, new literacies, digital literacies, and the idea is that literacy is, and people are fighting and debating over the meaning of that. So it's not something that there's a lot of agreement on, and you would certainly find people who only define it in terms of reading and writing written language. But my own interests and my own work, and when I prepare teachers and when I'm working, it seems to me that it's very hard to separate out reading from writing, from speaking, from the use of other communication systems, because we're one body, and these are actually very embodied practices. So that's why I've been talking about literacy for younger children, because it was in some of that early research that we began to break open our assumptions about children's language and about what counted as literacy. So I often use that as a framing question with students. What counts as literacy? And just to have a conversation about that is, it's what we're doing now, but it's interesting. So you will find that when I went to school at Indiana University, I was in a department of reading education, and now it's called Literacy, Language, and Culture. You will look across at all the universities, and you will still find some that define it as reading. And in that sense, they're arguing against a broader meaning, and they're saying, no, we're going to focus on this meaning of reading, which we have a lot of variation in the field. So there's, that's pretty typical. But you will see across the country that the departments that prepare literacy educators, like literacy specialists, professors, are now moved from reading to literacy. And the vocabulary represents a shift in the thinking. So that's kind of what's going on. Yeah?
It's almost like, I'm not sure society is yet ready for all this, because when I think of, there's everywhere you look, there's a test for college, for this school. There's a writing component. There's, for the doctoral program, there's some kind of testing that involves reading and writing. And then I teach kids with learning disabilities, and they're brilliant on the computer and creating graphic design. But when they take the same test that the honors kids take, you know, the ELA test, they do horribly wrong. And then that affects their self-esteem, and then their parents are saying, well, they can't read and write. And it's almost like if you can't read and write, there's something wrong with you. And it's still, I think society is kind of stuck in that.
I think you're right. I mean, I know you're right. But what's interesting is to see what companies and what industries are the goers now. You know,
Yeah.
Google, the companies that are part of the new literacies are really, they're reshaping our lives in many, many ways, our social lives, but also our communicative landscape is really changing. And so the question, that's when I said there's a big gap between what's going on beyond school walls and what's going on inside school walls. And, you know, society, of course, reflects our own schooled experiences. So we're schooled, you know, and we think that we carry that with us. And we don't sometimes look back and to think, how could school be otherwise? And that's, you know, that's a pretty tough nut, especially in this policy climate. So we're at a moment that is actually pretty, you know, pretty distressing from my point of view in terms of the dominance, the continued emphasis placed on that. And we have to, you know, think about it because we have to go for funding and we have to, and I also don't want to be interpreted as saying that I don't think reading and writing matters in a conventional sense. It's never going to go away. But it's the case, and video games is a good example. You know, everybody likes to go, you know, be very critical of video games, but in fact, video games are being tapped as a wonderful resource for learning, and we have to find more ways so that kids who have different pathways to learning, that they don't have to be like one metric to judge what is good learning. And, you know, video games are a way, and in fact, video games are, I just saw something in the Times about video games, and I mean something very exciting, and they're the biggest sellers, and people who know how to design these video games, like the kids who can design the video games, maybe they don't need to pass, you know, some of those tests. And I know that is a really radical thing to say, but I offer it up not because I'm ready to throw the other kind of literacy out, but also as a reminder of what goes on, what's going on outside school.
With my kids growing up, I told my spouse back then, I said, they gotta check a C-SPAN and book TV. I don't want to hear about this other crap you was.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
to speak.
Well, it's actually interesting.
And eventually it did help them along the way.
Yeah. Actually, MIT is one of the places. There's he's moved from there to USC. A fellow named Henry Jenkins, who's really a cultural studies guy in language and communication, and he is writing curriculum that is tapping this new media and teaching and learning. And so, I mean, things are shifting very rapidly. But again, what's happening in schools and why is there such a disconnect? That is one of the biggest challenges that we have. I thank you very much for coming and listening and questioning, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marjorie, and again, Mary Jo, thank you for bringing this wonderful opportunity for us to talk about literacy and really explore some of the research that's happening and been ongoing and is now finally making its way into the classroom and still leaving questions and things for us to continue working on here at TC. And we hope you'll encourage new students to attend Teachers College to help solve these questions and just keep that cycle going. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for being so flexible. Please enjoy a little bit more of the reception and the opportunity to network with one another. So thank you, and we hope to see you at the next event.
Thank you.